The sound of a notification on my phone became a harbinger of silence. Not the peaceful silence that fills a house after midnight, but the deafening, vacuum-packed quiet that hits a moment before a car crash. It all started 3 months ago on a Thursday. I was watering my peace, hybrid tea roses when my phone, resting on the garden bench, let out a little chime. It was from the Family Circle group chat. The message was from my older daughter, Jessica. A single, contextless phrase glowed on the screen, as strange and out of place as snow in July. She's doing it again. Don't fall for it. I stared at the words, the water from my can dripping onto my shoes. She who? Doing what? And who wasn't supposed to fall for it? I was the only one who hadn't read the message yet. A second later, it vanished. This message was deleted. But the silence it left behind was already ringing in my ears. I didn't know it then, but that ping was the first note in a symphony of betrayal, a score I would study for months before hiring my own conductor. And a judge. My name is Caroline Sterling. At 64, I'm a product of an America that believed in the rules. Work hard, pay your taxes, be good to your neighbors, and the system will take care of you. For 35 years, I worked in Philadelphia at a law firm, Morgan & Finch, as a contract negotiator. My job wasn't to win in court, but to prevent things from ever getting there. I drafted agreements so airtight, so insulated from ambiguity, that the opposing side had no loopholes to exploit. I was an architect of compromises, an engineer of handshakes. My late husband, Edward, a history professor, used to joke that I could draft a prenuptial agreement between a cat and a dog, and they'd both abide by it. We were married for 41 years. His passing 3 years ago left a crater in my life that I was slowly, painstakingly learning to navigate. I never tried to fill it. Voids like that are sacred. Instead, I built bridges over it, erected new supports. My life after Edward became a quiet, orderly ritual. Mondays and Wednesdays, I volunteered at the local library in the Philly suburbs where I now lived. Tuesdays were for my over 50s yoga class. Thursdays were for the garden. Fridays were for lunch with my one close friend, Sarah. Weekends were reserved for family. My daughters, Jessica and Chloe, were my entire world. Jess, the elder, was a carbon copy of her father, ambitious, sharp-tongued, a career woman in corporate finance. Chloe, my youngest, took after me softer, more empathetic, a dedicated mother to her 2 children, Leo and Maya. They lived an hour away in opposite directions, and I tried to be the perfect modern mother and grandmother, available, but not intrusive. I brought gifts, but always called first. I offered to help, but never insisted. I was a Swiss Army knife for their emergencies, to babysit a sick grandchild, to help with mortgage paperwork, to float their husbands, Mark and David, alone when they hit one of their temporary rough patches. I did it all gladly. It was my way of saying I love you in the language of actions, not words. My homemade 2-story colonial Edward, and I bought after Chloe was born, was my fortress. Everything here had its place. Edward's books stood in the exact order he'd left them. His portrait, painted by a local artist, hung in the living room. He looks out from it with a wry smile, as if he knows some amusing historical secret. Every morning, I'd brew the same brand of English breakfast tea we used to share, sit in his armchair, and check my 401k with Vanguard. It wasn't an obsession with money. It was a ritual of control. Edward had left me well provided for, and thanks to my own meticulous planning, I'd even grown our nest egg. Financial stability gave me a sense of security I was desperate to pass on to my daughters. Our family circle group chat was the digital town square of this orderly universe. In the morning, I'd send pictures of my roses. Chloe would share a funny video of the kids. Jessica might drop a link to a Wall Street Journal article with a curt, FYI. Their husbands, Mark and David, mostly lurked, occasionally sending a thumbs-up emoji. For me, that chat was a window into their lives, a vibrant thread connecting us across the miles. I'd scroll through it every night before bed, smiling at photos of Leo in his soccer uniform or Maya's first steps. It was my illusion of closeness, my daily dose of assurance that everything was okay. Everything was under control. Looking back, The warning signs were there, but my brain, trained to find compromises, not conflicts, refused to register them. A few times, I noticed my messages would go unanswered for hours, even though I could see my daughters had been online. Sometimes when I called Chloe, she'd answer in a hushed voice, and I'd hear David laughing in the background before she'd hurry off with, "Mom, I'll call you back." Jessica began canceling our plans more frequently, always citing a last-minute work emergency. I made 1,000 excuses for them. Jess is building her career. It takes sacrifice. Chloe has 2 small children. She's exhausted. The boys I still called their husbands that work so hard to provide. I was a mother, which meant I was a professional excuse maker for my children. Trust is a muscle. If you don't exercise it, it atrophies. I exercised mine daily, ignoring the slight twinge of pain it sometimes caused. I remember once driving over to Chloe's unannounced to drop off a model space shuttle Leo desperately wanted. I found her and David on their back patio, drinking wine and laughing. When Chloe saw me, she flinched, her smile freezing on her face. "Mom, you should have called," she said, her tone not one of surprise, but of annoyance. As if I'd caught them in a secret. I chalked it up to her being tired and my own tactlessness. I apologized, gave Leo his gift, and left quickly, feeling foolish. I refused to see what was right in front of me, the tension in their shoulders, the quick glance they exchanged behind my back. I only saw what I wanted to see, my loving daughter and her family. After retiring, I discovered a world outside of boardrooms and family obligations. I started taking art history courses at the local community college, fulfilling a dream Edward and I had shared. I found joy in hiking the trails at Valley Forge National Park. My life wasn't empty. It was full of quiet, meaningful things that brought me peace. My most important value has always been honesty. In my career, I'd seen how half-truths, white lies, and hidden clauses could bring down entire corporations. I believed in transparency. I taught my daughters the same. Tell the truth, even when it's hard. I'd told them since they were little. A lie is a debt to reality. Eventually, you have to pay it back. I was certain they'd learned that lesson. I believed in the foundation Edward, and I had laid for this family a foundation of love, support, and above all, honesty. I didn't realize that while I was building my new life on that solid foundation, someone else was methodically planting dynamite at its base, using the most modern tools, instant messaging and smiley face emojis that hit a cold calculation. It all blew up because I wanted to help. During one of our rare family dinners, David, Chloe's husband, mentioned offhandedly that they dreamed of moving to a bigger house, but couldn't afford the down payment. Jessica and Mark immediately chimed in, complaining about their car loan payments. They spoke about it with the casual despair of people discussing bad weather. I lay awake all night. I thought about my grandchildren. I wanted Leo to have his own room and Maya to have a safe backyard to play in. I wanted my daughters to worry less about money and more about living. In the morning, I called my financial advisor. After running the numbers, I made my decision. I would give each family $75,000. Not a loan, a gift. I told them over the phone the next day. First, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then, an explosion of joy. Chloe cried into the phone. Jessica said I was the best mother in the world. Their gratitude was so effusive, so seemingly genuine. I felt a pure, uncomplicated happiness. I had done what I'd worked my whole life to ensure the well-being of my family. I wired the money the same day, having my notary draw up gift letters so they wouldn't have any tax issues. It was a simple, clean act of love. I could never have imagined that this gesture, this act of generosity, would become the prosecution's exhibit in the secret trial they were holding against me. A week after I'd given them the money, Chloe came to visit with the kids. It was one of those perfect autumn days, the air crisp and clean. We baked an apple pie, Leo and Maya ran around the yard, and the house was filled with a picture-perfect bliss. As they were getting ready to leave that evening, Chloe couldn't find her tablet. We searched the house and finally found it wedged between the sofa cushions. "Oh, thank God. I have a video conference on this tomorrow," she said, relieved. She got the kids settled in the car, and I offered to bring the tablet out to her. As I picked it up, the screen lit up. It was open to her messaging app, and I saw the name of a group chat, Family Circle Uncensored. My heart skipped a beat. The icon was the same as our regular chat. And the participants, Jessica, Chloe, Mark, David. Everyone but me. It was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. My finger, trembling, touched the screen. I opened the chat, and my world fell apart. It was a transcript of my own character assassination. Hundreds of messages. My photos from the garden met with snide comments from Mark about my exciting life, a dissection of my every word, my every action. And the money, God, the money. Jessica, $75,000. She thinks she can just buy our affection. So predictable. David, should have asked for more. The old lady is clearly flush with cash. Chloe, you played the poor little me part perfectly. And Chloe, my sweet, quiet Chloe, had replied with a laughing emoji. It got worse. They called me controlling, toxic, a matriarch who can't let go. My gift wasn't an act of love. It was a strategic investment in our guilt. My phone calls were check-ins. My offers to help with the grandkids were attempts to undermine their parenting. I stood in the middle of my perfectly tidy living room, holding this glowing rectangle of hate. Edward's portrait on the wall looked down at me with his eternal, wry smile, but now it seemed bitter. The sound of Chloe's car pulling away was like a gunshot in the deafening silence of my shattered world. She waved at me from the window. And like an automaton, I waved back, clutching in my other hand the evidence that my entire life, all my love, my whole family, was a lie. The first 48 hours after opening Pandora's box on Chloe's tablet were a fog. I moved through my house like a ghost, performing my daily rituals on autopilot. I brewed tea I didn't drink. I turned on the news I didn't hear. I laid out solitaire cards on the kitchen table without seeing them. My home, my fortress, had become a crime scene, and I was both the victim and the sole witness. Every room held an echo of their lies. There was the armchair Chloe had sat in while her husband called me the old lady in their secret chat. There was the rug Leo had played on while his mother replied with a laughing emoji to an insult aimed at me. Sleep wouldn't come. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, the words from their chat burning on my retinas like a brand. Controlling. Toxic. Thinks she can buy us. Each word was a stone thrown at the mirror of my self-perception, and it was cracking, shattering into 1,000 ugly pieces. The woman I thought I was, a caring mother, a generous grandmother, the family's bedrock had ceased to exist. In her place was a caricature, a monster they had painted in their secret world. Physically, the betrayal felt like a chronic illness. My appetite vanished. My heart hammered against my ribs at every notification ping from my phone. I stopped answering calls. When Jessica called on Tuesday, I stared at her picture on the screen as a wave of icy dread washed over me. I couldn't speak to her. I didn't know which version I'd be talking to, my daughter or the ruthless prosecutor from the uncensored chat. I declined a call. A minute later, a message popped up in our official family circle chat. Mom, is everything okay? You're not answering. I looked at the words and saw the invisible ink beneath them. Mom, are you taking the bait? Are you feeling guilty enough for ignoring us yet? On the third night, exhausted from insomnia, I got up and walked to my study. I turned on my laptop and opened a blank Word document. In my old life, when I was preparing for a difficult negotiation, the first step was always to gather and systemize the facts. Emotions are fog, facts are a lighthouse. I instinctively reached for what I knew how to do. I picked up my phone and started taking screenshots. Not of the chat I'd seen on Chloe's tablet. No, I started with our official chat. I meticulously scrolled back through months, years of our correspondence, and now, with this new knowledge, I saw everything differently. Here was my message offering to pay for Leah's piano lessons. Chloe's reply, an enthusiastic emoji. Now I knew that in their other chat, at that very same minute, a message could have appeared saying, "She's at it again with the money, trying to turn my son into the next Mozart." Here was the picture I sent last Christmas me in the reindeer sweater Jessica had given me. Her reply in the chat, "Mom, it looks so cute on you," but what was being written in their chat? Were they mocking my taste? Discussing how old I was getting? Every screenshot was a painful jab, but with each new file saved to a folder blandly labeled Documentation 2025, the fog in my head began to clear. In place of paralyzing pain, a cold, crystalline anger started to form. They had created a narrative about me, a false story. Fine. I would build my own story. A story backed by evidence, by dates, times, and direct quotes. This was territory I knew. I was no longer a victim in a fog of grief. I was an analyst preparing for the most important arbitration of my life. The turning point came on Friday. I was scheduled to have lunch with Sarah. I wanted to cancel, unable to feign normalcy. But something inside me, the same voice that used to make me double-check every comma in a $10 million contract, said, isolation is their goal. Don't give it to them. Sarah, a former corporate lawyer who now owned a small art gallery, knew me better than anyone. She looked at me over her Cobb salad and said, Caroline, you look like you haven't slept since the Carter administration. What happened? And I told her. I laid out everything, trying to speak evenly, without tears, presenting the facts as if it were just another business case. When I finished, Sarah was quiet for a long time, stirring the ice in her glass. I expected sympathy, platitudes. Instead, she looked at me with her sharp, incisive gaze and said something that changed everything. They breached a fundamental social contract, Caroline. Even worse, a family one. You were an investor, pouring everything into this, project time, love, money. And they didn't just run the business into the ground. They concocted a fraudulent scheme to write off all the assets, pin the failure on you, and keep the cash. Her words were brutal and brilliant. She had translated my family tragedy into the one language my brain was currently equipped to process, the language of law and business. Fraud, breach of contract, malicious conspiracy. So, what are you going to do? She asked. Write it off as a bad investment and walk away? Or are you going to conduct a full audit and send them an invoice? In that moment, the grieving mother inside me finally gave way to Caroline Sterling, the negotiator. And I knew the answer. I'm conducting an audit. And they will pay. Not with money. The currency will be different. It will be truth. Back home, I created a new file. I named it Project Boundary. The work began. First, I created a detailed profile of each member of the conspiracy. Jessica and Mark. Motivation, envy, and an inferiority complex. Jessica had always competed with the memory of her successful father. I was a living reminder of a world she desperately wanted to be a part of but felt she didn't deserve. Mark, her husband, with his string of failed startups, simply resented anyone with money. Their weakness, their finances. They lived beyond their means, and my gift was both a lifeline and a humiliation to them. Chloe and David. Motivation, resentment, and a follower mentality. Chloe had always lived in her sister's shadow. Her softness was her curse. She likely went along with the others to feel like she was part of the adult coalition. David, lazy and smug, simply enjoyed the power of bad-mouthing the mother-in-law he believed looked down on him. Their weakness, the grandchildren. They genuinely loved Leo and Maya, but they used them as bargaining chips. I printed out the screenshots of their most vile messages that I had managed to photograph on Chloe's tablet. I cross-referenced them with the dates of my financial gifts, my offers of help, my visits. A depressingly clear pattern emerged. Every positive move I made toward them was met with a spike of negativity and ridicule behind my back. This wasn't just ingratitude. This was a systematic, targeted smear campaign. The goal? To preemptively justify a future where they could cut me out of their lives completely while maintaining access to my resources. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed professionals. My first step wasn't to find a lawyer. That would be too direct. My first step was to find the best family therapist in Pennsylvania who specialized in what the pop psychology articles called toxic family systems. I spent 2 days online, reading reviews, studying blogs, watching YouTube clips. I found her. Dr. Amelia Radford. Her approach wasn't about making everyone get along. Her approach, judging by her articles, was about teaching clients to build impenetrable personal boundaries using clear, almost legalistic frameworks. She was my perfect weapon. I booked a virtual consultation, presenting myself as a woman wanting to improve communication with my family. I wasn't going to dump the whole truth on her at once. This was a reconnaissance mission. I needed to understand her methods, to get my hands on her tools, her vocabulary. At the same time, I made another call to my old notary. I asked him to prepare copies of all the gift letters and documents related to the financial assistance I had given my daughters over the last 5 years. Just getting my ducks in a row for my estate planner, I lied. I was assembling my arsenal. The session with Dr. Radford was a revelation. I carefully described the situation in vague terms, framing it as a series of misunderstandings and different communication styles. She listened intently, then said the phrase that became the cornerstone of my entire plan. "Mrs. Sterling," she said, "sometimes the problem isn't the communication, but the lack of a clearly articulated and mutually accepted terms of service. You are providing a service emotional, financial, and temporal. What are the terms for receiving it? What are the consequences for violating those terms of service? A contract." She was speaking my language. I lamented that our family ran on unspoken rules, which led to hurt feelings. "What if you made them spoken rules?" she asked. "What if you drafted something called a family boundary contract? Not a legal document, of course, but a memorandum of understanding. Something that outlines expectations, rules for respectful communication, and consequences for violations, like a temporary timeout on contact." A switch flipped in my head. This was it. It was brilliant. I wouldn't accuse them. I wouldn't scream or cry. I would offer them a contract, a document based on the principles of mutual respect. And I knew with absolute certainty that they would refuse to even consider it. Their refusal would be my trump card. It would prove that they didn't want respect. They wanted my unconditional surrender and my resources. While I was developing my strategy, the other side went on the offensive. My silence was clearly making them nervous. They began to employ a tactic I now recognized instantly: manipulation, using my grandchildren. First, Chloe called. Her voice was sweet as honey. "Mom, hi. Haven't heard from you. Leo misses you so much. He keeps asking, when are we going to see Grandma Carrie? Maybe we could stop by this weekend." A year ago, I would have melted. Now, all I heard was the falseness. "This weekend doesn't work for me, honey." "I have plans," I replied, my voice perfectly level. The pause on the other end was louder than any words. "Oh, okay. Well, that's too bad. Leo's going to be disappointed." A day later, a message from Jessica in the group chat. A picture of Maya building a tower of blocks. The caption: "Maya said her first word today. She said, 'Grandma, a real shame some grandmas miss out on moments like these.' It was a low blow. Calculated, cruel, and public. They were raising the stakes, trying to guilt me back into my prescribed role, the ever-forgiving, convenient mother and eternal ATM. They didn't know that role had been discontinued. I methodically screenshotted every passive-aggressive jab and added it to my folder. They were, with their own hands, building my case for me. The tension was mounting, and I could feel a spring inside me coiling tighter and tighter. The climax came at the end of the second week of my silence. An email appeared in my inbox. It was from Mark, Jessica's husband. The subject line, "Let's be honest," in the email, he wrote that they were all very concerned about my behavior. That my withdrawal was hurting my daughters and grandchildren. That my recent generous gift must have been intended to manipulate them, and since I had decided to play the silent game, they weren't sure they could accept such a gift with strings attached. And then came the kill shot. "Jessica thinks you should talk to a professional. Your behavior is becoming irrational. We're worried about your mental health." They had crossed the line. They were going to paint me as crazy. It was a classic gaslighting maneuver, so blatant that I actually laughed out loud. They wanted to lock me in a cage of self-doubt and psychiatric diagnoses. They thought I would break. Even when it seemed like all was lost, when my own home felt like enemy territory and the people closest to me were trying to convince me I was losing my mind, I did not give up. On the contrary, their clumsy move showed me I was on the right path. It showed me they were scared, and it meant it was time to move from preparation to action. I closed my laptop. I picked up my phone. My fingers were steady now. I found the number in my address book that Sarah had given me, just in case. The number of the best family law attorney in Philadelphia. I pressed dial. After a few rings, a calm, female voice answered. Law offices of Albright and Associates, how can I help you? And I, Caroline Sterling, the woman who had spent her life preventing wars, replied in a voice that held not a single shred of doubt. Hello. My name is Caroline Sterling. I'd like to schedule a consultation with MS. Albright regarding a restraining order and court-ordered grandparent visitation rights. The law offices of Albright and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a skyscraper in Center City. I was escorted to a conference room with a panoramic view of Philadelphia. The walls were ivory, the dark wood table was polished to a mirror shine, and the air held the faint scent of lemon wax and expensive books. Everything about the place was designed to communicate one thing. You're in a place where the chaos of the outside world is brought to heel by the order of the law. It was calming. MS. Margaret Albright was a woman in her 50s with a sharp, steel gray haircut and eyes that seemed to scan you for weaknesses and exaggerations. She exuded no false sympathy. She shook my hand. Her grip was firm and dry and gestured to a chair. Mrs. Sterling, she began, opening a slim folder. My paralegal gave me the broad strokes, but I prefer to hear it from the beginning. Tell me everything. I took a deep breath and began. But it wasn't a weeping mother or a wounded victim who spoke. It was Caroline Sterling, the contract negotiator. I did not talk about my feelings. I presented the facts. I laid out a printed timeline on the table. Here is the date of my financial gift, and here are screenshots from their secret chat 2 days later, discussing how well Chloe played her part. Here is the date I offered to pay for my grandson's music lessons, and here are their comments about me trying to control him. I spoke evenly, methodically, referencing dates, amounts, and direct quotes. I handed her the printout of the email from Mark questioning my mental health. Margaret Albright listened without interrupting, only occasionally jotting a note in her legal pad. When I finished, she spent several minutes silently reviewing the documents. The quiet in the room was thick, tangible. Finally, she looked up. This isn't a family dispute, Mrs. Sterling, she said, her voice devoid of doubt. This is a classic case of coordinated psychological and financial abuse. Their endgame, judging by this email, is to completely discredit you, possibly with an eye toward gaining control of your finances in the future, should your irrational behavior worsen. To hear it from a third party, an impartial professional, was both terrifying and liberating. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't irrational. I was under attack. What are my options? I asked. We have 2 primary avenues, Albright said, ticking them off on her fingers. First, defense. We can immediately petition for a personal protection order, the restraining order. The court would prohibit them from contacting you, harassing you, or threatening you, including in the digital space. Given this evidence, she nodded at the folder, our chances are very high. Second, offense, or rather, asserting your rights. We can file a petition for grandparent visitation. That's a harder fight. Pennsylvania courts are reluctant to interfere with parental decisions. We would have to prove that a relationship with you is in the best interests of the children and that their parents are creating an unhealthy environment that prevents it. She leaned back in her chair. Either path means war. It will be messy, long, and expensive. They will paint you as a monster in court. Are you prepared for that? I looked down at my hands on the table. They weren't shaking. I spent 35 years of my life drafting contracts to prevent wars, MS. Albright. I know the cost of conflict, but I also know that sometimes the only thing worse than a fight is a bad peace. They have already started this war. I just want to end it on my terms. A flicker of a smile touched her lips. Good. Then here is our first move. Before we push the nuclear button, We must demonstrate to the court that we have exhausted all peaceful means. You are going to offer them one last chance at mediation. The idea of offering mediation after everything I'd learned felt absurd. But I trusted Albright's strategy. This wasn't a gesture of goodwill. It was a calculated legal maneuver. That evening, I sat on my sofa, phone in hand. My heart was pounding, but my voice had to be calm. I called Jessica first. "Hi, Mom." Finally, her voice was laced with triumph. "Jessica," I said evenly, letting the comment slide. "I'm calling you and Chloe with a proposal. I think we can all agree there's been a serious breakdown in our communication. I want to fix it. I've made an appointment with a family therapist, Dr. Amelia Radford. I'd like to invite you, Mark, Chloe, and David to a single joint session next week, so we can all air our feelings in a safe space and try to hear each other. I'll cover the cost." There was silence on the other end. I could hear her cover the receiver and whisper furiously to Mark. I could practically read their minds. "She's cracked. She's running to a shrink. Perfect. We'll go and tell the professional what she's really like." "Mom," Jessica's voice was now oozing with false concern. "I think that's a wonderful idea. We've been so worried about you. Of course, we'll be there. We'll support you." I made the same call to Chloe. The reaction was nearly identical. A hesitant agreement that barely concealed the thrill of a predator sensing weakness. They had agreed. The trap was set. They were walking right into it, convinced it was their own triumphant hunt. They had no idea that in this scenario, they had been cast as the prey. And I wasn't the victim. I was the hunter, driving them into the open. Dr. Radford's office was the antithesis of Albright's. Soft chairs, warm lighting, abstract watercolors, and soothing tones on the walls. It was a space designed to encourage vulnerability. They arrived together, a united front. They sat on the sofa opposite my armchair. Jessica and Chloe in the middle, their husbands on either side like bookends. Their posture radiated condescension and a readiness for battle. Dr. Radford, an elegant woman with perceptive eyes, began the session. "Caroline," she said to me, "you initiated this meeting, but I'd like to give the floor to your daughters first. Jessica, Chloe, please tell me what's been troubling you. How are you feeling about your relationship with your mother?" It was the cue they'd been waiting for. Jessica went first. She spoke smoothly, confidently, as if she were delivering a quarterly report. She talked about my over-involvement, my constant interference in their lives. She brought up my gift of $75,000. "We're grateful, of course," she said, glancing at me. But it felt like too much. "We felt it wasn't just a gift, but a way to assert power, to put us in your debt. We don't want our children growing up thinking love can be bought." Then Chloe spoke. Her voice trembled, and she stared at her lap. She talked about feeling like a little girl around me, about being afraid of disappointing me. She said my help with the grandkids sometimes felt like a criticism of her own mothering. Their husbands nodded along, adding their own lines. "We just want to live our own lives." Caroline is a strong woman, but she doesn't always see where the boundaries are. They were lying. But it was a masterful, well-rehearsed lie, woven with just enough half-truth to sound convincing to an outsider. They were painting themselves as the victims of an overbearing matriarch. I sat in silence. I looked at their faces, the faces of the children I had raised, and I felt nothing but an icy calm. The pain was gone. All that remained was a sharp focus on the end goal. I let them say their piece, let them lay all their false cards on the table. When they finished, a silence fell over the room. Everyone looked at me, expecting a reaction: tears, justifications, anger. Dr. Radford asked gently, "Caroline, what would you like to say in response?" I slowly leaned forward and took 5 thin folders out of my bag. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Thank you for sharing your feelings. I have heard you." I heard the words boundaries, respect, and interference, and I agree. We need clear rules to avoid these misunderstandings in the future. I placed a folder on the coffee table in front of each couple and one in front of Dr. Radford. "This is not a legal document," I explained. "I've called it a memorandum of respectful conduct. I drafted it based on principles that family therapists, including yourself, Dr. Radford, often recommend. It contains just a few simple points. I opened my own copy. The room was utterly still. Point 1, I began to read aloud, articulating every word. All family members agree to communicate with one another in a respectful manner, both in person and in all forms of digital communication, including but not limited to group chats. The use of derogatory, insulting, or belittling language in reference to any family member is unacceptable. I paused, looking at each of them. Their expressions were beginning to change. Point 2, financial assistance or gifts provided by one family member to another are to be considered voluntary and unconditional acts. They cannot be used as a basis for subsequent accusations of manipulation, control, or attempts to buy affection. Jessica's face was turning to stone. Point 3, the relationship between grandparents and grandchildren holds its own intrinsic value. Access to grandchildren cannot be used as a tool of emotional leverage, punishment, or reward in the relationship between adult family members. I read the final point, and point 4. In the event of a disagreement, the parties agree to discuss it directly and privately without involving third parties or creating coalitions or secret discussions aimed at another family member. I closed the folder. That's it. I'm not asking you to sign it right now. I'm simply asking you to affirm that you agree with these basic principles of respect, as a good faith gesture to move forward. Do you agree? This was the moment of truth. The seconds stretched on. I could see the panic warring with anger in their eyes. They got it. They understood everything. This wasn't a surrender. It was an ultimatum, wrapped in the language of therapy. Mark was the first to break. He let out a short, sharp laugh. Are you kidding me? He waved a hand at the document. What is this garbage? Some kind of corporate charter for our family. We're not signing this. Mark, please, Dr. Radford began, but he was already on his feet. No, you listen, he snarled. She comes in here, plays the victim, then slides this. Contract across the table. This is the control we're talking about. She's trying to manage us even in here. Jessica stood up, her face twisted with fury. The mask of the concerned daughter was gone, revealing a snarl of contempt. I knew this was a trap, she yelled, pointing at me. You don't want to fix anything. You just want to be right. We don't agree to any of it. Chloe was silent, her face as white as a sheet. She was staring at me with horror, as if seeing me for the first time. She knew the game was over, so I said, my voice like ice, looking directly at Jessica. Let me be clear. You do not agree with the point about refraining from insults? Or the point about not using my grandchildren as leverage? She faltered, realizing I had backed her into a corner. But it was too late to retreat. You're twisting everything. She hissed, we're leaving. They stood up and walked to the door without another word. Chloe shot one last, haunted look in my direction before David pulled her by the arm. When the door closed behind them, I slowly turned to Dr. Radford. She was looking at the folders on the table, then at me. There was no surprise on her face, only a professional sadness. You knew this would happen, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I replied, but now you know it too. And now it's on the record. I gathered the unsigned memorandums. They were more valuable this way. They were physical proof of their refusal to make peace. The next few weeks were a hell of legal paperwork. Margaret Albright and her team worked like a well-oiled machine. My screenshots, the financial documents, the statement from DR. Radford, which was impeccably neutral, merely confirming a mediation session was held and that the other parties declined to engage constructively. All of it formed the basis of our case. The court date was set for 2 months later. It was the longest 2 months of my life. They tried to apply pressure. I got calls from unknown numbers. On social media, their friends started leaving snide comments on my old photos. It was agony, but I knew that every move they made only strengthened my case. On the day of the hearing, I wore a tailored gray suit, my old armor from my corporate days. They sat on the other side of the courtroom, my daughters, their husbands, their lawyer. They wouldn't look at me. Their faces were full of self-righteous anger. The proceedings were held in a closed session. The judge, an older woman with tired eyes, silently flipped through the thick binder containing our petition. She read the printouts from the uncensored chat. She read Mark's email about my mental health. She read my memorandum of respectful conduct. Their lawyer tried to frame the whole thing as a family squabble that got out of hand. He argued I was suffocating them with my generosity, that they were just letting off steam. The judge listened, then took off her glasses and looked directly at my daughters. Letting off steam, she asked quietly, "Is that what you call it?" Secretly discussing how the mother who just gave you $75,000 is trying to buy you. Laughing about how well one of you played her part, silence filled the room. The ruling came an hour later. Restraining order, granted. For a period of 3 years. All contact calls, texts, social media posts was forbidden. They were ordered to stay at least 100 yards away from me. Grandparent visitation, established. Twice a month for 4 hours at a neutral location A community center in the presence of a court-appointed supervisor. For the first 6 months, I walked out into the quiet courthouse hallway. I had won. I had gotten everything I asked for. On the far side of the hall, they stood there. Chloe was crying, and Jessica was looking at me with a hatred so pure, so undiluted, it took my breath away. There was no remorse in her eyes, no regret, only the fury of the defeated. I realized in that moment that I hadn't just won a court case. I had lost my family. For good. Justice had been served. But the price of that justice was devastating. 6 months have passed. It's the spring of 2025. Life has settled into a new, strange rhythm. The silence in my house is no longer oppressive. It's peaceful. The phone doesn't ring. There are no more notifications that make my heart seize up. No more calls filled with lies. There is only quiet. Twice a month, I meet Leo and Maya in the playroom at the community center. A pleasant young woman named Emily is always with us. The kids were scared at first. Chloe and Jessica had clearly told them their version of events. But children are resilient. After 15 minutes, they forget everything and show me their drawings. Leo tells me about school. Maya shows me her new doll. I bring them books and we read. I don't ask about their parents. They don't ask about me. These 4 hours are our small island in an ocean of estrangement. It's not much, but it's more than nothing. It's what I was able to win back for them. I spend a lot of time in my garden tending my roses. Sometimes, as I'm pulling weeds, I think about how I spent my life believing in contracts. I thought their purpose was to bind people together, to forge strong connections. But I was wrong. Sometimes, the most important function of a contract isn't to hold people together, but to give them a civilized way to stand apart, to define the boundaries in the ashes. I signed such a contract with my own family. It's written on watermarked paper and stamped with a court seal. It doesn't speak of love or forgiveness. It speaks of distance, of consequences, of the right to be left in peace. I paid for it with everything I had. But today, breathing the clean spring air in my quiet garden, for the first time in a long time, I feel like my life is my own again. And this silence isn't the silence of emptiness. It's the silence of peace. My peace, the one I fought for.